Welcome to an encore performance of Resilient Women in Medicine. I'm Beverly Joyce. I'm a physician coach. I'm a gynecologist. I'm a burnout survivor and wellness champion. And I am joined today by my good friend, Sheva Carr. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell you all about her.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here, Bev, to speak to my healthcare heroes. So I could say very similar things, though I'm not a gynecologist. I am for sure a healthcare burnout survivor, and I have a pretty eclectic healthcare background, starting working as a lab rat in my father's medical research laboratory when I was 10, cleaning pipettes for him. And doing little things for his experiments. So I grew up, he was with a PhD as well as an MD and did a lot of research. He was an immunologist and a rheumatologist. So I grew up around a healthcare conversation. Instead of reading Go Dog Go when I was a kid, I was reading from his medical journals because it made me sound smart to him to read those long words and sound them out. He got a kick out of it. So I grew up in the healthcare conversation and ended up going into medicine after living in a war zone as an aid worker, feeling powerless to help these orphans that I was trying to assist in an economic embargo during a war, and feeling like if I only had, fill in the blank, antiseptic soap, a course of antibiotics to give, I would have saved lives. So that's what launched both my personal healthcare journey to get well myself as I came back with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress living in that war, as well as my healthcare career, which may not surprise your listeners, a little bit like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, because working in healthcare, especially now in a COVID and post-COVID, hopefully, environment, is it in its own battlefield.
Absolutely.
And so, the tools I found to help myself recover became the tools I now train almost full time in the healthcare space. And I'm a co-director at HeartMath Healthcare, where
Wonderful.
we teach HeartMath interventions to help healthcare workers with managing their energy and stress, and I would now say PTSD as well.
Absolutely.
And compassion fatigue and burnout.
So we're going to talk a little more about that in our second conversation, and I definitely want to get into the details of how you help physicians and other healthcare workers with that. But first, tell us a little bit about your own sort of story of how you transitioned through your PTSD and found resilience in your own life.
So in 1989, when I was living in Nicaragua during their civil war, doing aid work with orphaned children and street children from the war, and came back traumatized, that wasn't the diagnosis. I had all kinds of symptoms, gynecological symptoms being top of the list, orthopedic symptoms, lots of gophers physiologically popping out of their holes. So I was bounced around hospitalization after hospitalization from one specialist to another, trying to pin down what was going on. And because I'd lived in the tropics, everyone sent me to infectious diseases thinking you must have a parasite or something like that. It took 8 years for me to discover, through volunteering actually on my spring break from medical school at the Institute of HeartMath, where the job they gave me, which was for a young med student, like being a pig in mud, the job they gave me was to transcribe all their research. So I'm sitting in this little closet at this research institute on my spring break from medical school, still struggling with my own health as I'm trying to put myself through grad school, typing all this research, and the patients they're describing have all my symptoms. And I'm listening, obviously, very attentively and uncovering, almost like a scientist in my own action adventure movie, that what's been going on can all be explained by autonomic nervous system dysregulation. The gynecological problems, the psychological problems, the psycho-emotional problems, the sleep disruption, the skin disorders, the dermatological issues, the orthopedic issues can all be brought back to a dysregulated autonomic nervous system from stress and trauma. I'm listening to this research, hearing that these simple interventions, this institute I'm sitting in, can help me regulate all that myself. And if you can imagine 8 years of being bounced around, looking for answers, that was a turning point in my life. And so listening to that research convinced my head to use these tools that were helping me self-regulate my heart. And within 2 weeks, for example, I went into early menopause at 19 for 8 years with that post-trauma that I had from carrying dying kids, running from machine guns and this kind of stuff in that war. And within 2 weeks of practicing these self-regulation skills that helped me regulate my own heart rate variability, on the one hand, if we want to talk physician speak about it, if we want to talk human heart-to-heart speak about it, what I learned how to do was take this devastation I felt at failing those children, at failing to be able to serve them. I mean, this is our calling as physicians, we care. And so I felt like a failure that I had left those kids behind in that war to die on the front lines, to be hit by hurricanes, the young girls to be prostituted or sold for their organs. I mean, this was the front lines of the worst of what it is to be a human being. And I felt that I was a failure because I'd failed to save those kids. I was powerless to help. I took all that BS baggage that I'd put on myself and transformed it in my heart to love for them. I just started practicing these skills to stop beating myself up and start sending them love every day and appreciate. I thought at that point they were all dead, but I was able to find a place of gratitude and live my life from gratitude to honor what my love for those kids.
That's an amazing transformation that you're talking about, especially doing it relatively on your own without any background in, I'm guessing, you tell me, psychiatry, psychology, coaching. Coaching wasn't a thing back then.
Coaching was not a thing.
No, but all those things that you just mentioned are things that we do now as coaches to really sort of unpack what are these stories we're telling ourselves, and is that really true that you failed them? Obviously you did your best, you did what you could, and but it's just amazing to hear me tell your story about how some relatively simple things that you learned how to do could actually regulate that autonomic system and then have such an impact on the rest of your body functions.
I never could have fathomed how those little choices I made sitting in that little room typing at that transcription machine could have changed so much. So I really went for it because I had a medical mind and I'm not a research scientist kid. So I turned myself into my experiment. And I was like, okay, every time I catch myself feeling bad about what happened, I'm going to send those kids love. And within 2 weeks of doing that, my hormones regulated and I got my menstrual cycle back. This is now roughly 7 years, give or take, after I'd been in that war zone. However, so there was instant feedback in my own physiological system in terms of renewing me.
Right.
So it was self-preservation at that stage, but I had no idea the impact that I was also having in what we now might call through the electromagnetic field. And this could sound woo-woo, except any of us who worked in cardiology know if you hook somebody to an EKG, you're not going to sit there and hold their hand while you do the read, because we know our heart rhythms are interfacing with the patient's heart rhythms, and we want a clean read, right?
Right.
Why is that? That is woo-woo. Well, it's because the heart is electrical in nature, and everything electrical, like this computer I'm talking to you on, produces an electromagnetic field, and the heart does too, and those fields interact. Well, me sending those kids love also had a pretty wild impact. So 4 years after I learned how to do that on the spring break from medical school, I got a call in my medical office Easter Sunday morning. I was working on Easter Sunday. So that's a whole other conversation to have about overworking and burnout and
Yeah.
there. But I was working there Easter Sunday and the phone rang and the voice on the other end of the phone said, "Do you remember Julio, Ana Raquel, and Jorge?" And I burst into tears. Those kids had kept my Canadian phone number and my name on this little tiny ripped out piece of loose leaf paper in their pockets, living on the streets for 12 years. And when one of them married an expat in Ohio, she handed him that piece of paper and said, "This is my mama, you have to find her." And they tracked me down.
That's amazing.
And
Talk
then
about woo-woo. I mean, this is like the universe speaking to you. First of all, you're in medical school. You're going through the traditional Western medical training, and you get this job at HeartMath Institute.
okay, so just a couple of refinements. I started in medical school,
Okay.
going through the traditional medical training, and I didn't last. I couldn't take it. So I dropped out on the first round because of this PTSD that was debilitating me, that was undiagnosed. Then on my second attempt, the only thing that was helping my pain at that point was Chinese medicine. And so I transferred from my allopathic program, much to my father's chagrin, as you can imagine. I transferred from my allopathic program into Chinese medical school, which is a whole other story we could talk about, because now we're in parallel tracks where I have to get all my allopathic credits plus my CAM credits. So it was actually tougher academically for me.
Yeah.
But then what happened is I'm running my primary care practice in LA at the point that I got that phone call in my office. Yeah.
You know, the fact that you got that little internship at the HeartMath Institute, you read about all those things that were going on in your body at the time, and then to have it come full circle for those kids to track you down. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, it gets better because when those kids tracked me down, I got to see that I hadn't failed them.
Oh my God.
And if I could say one thing to all of our physicians watching this, you know, the founder of HeartMath Institute that created this research body of work and these tools that helped me so much at that point. And I've used other tools as well. It's multidisciplinary for sure. We could talk about some of the other interventions that helped me, but those are the tools I primarily do with physicians now and med students now. Says no love is ever wasted. When I was there with those kids on the streets, I felt handcuffed to help. And I know so many of us have felt that way through COVID as well.
Right.
But what I didn't know was just the fact that I cared made all the difference. Everybody knows the Hippocratic Oath, but there's a quote from Hippocrates that I don't hear very often that someone just shared with me that's become my favorite, which is it's diagnose sometimes, cure occasionally, but care always. Because the care matters. It's an end unto itself, even when we can't cure, care counts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we forget that sometimes as physicians when we're so busy measuring our success and failure by blood levels or oxygen levels or respiratory capacity or, we're measuring we have these 3D measuring success sticks of our success and failure, forgetting that it's our humanity and our human heart of caring that sometimes creates magic moments, even at end of life.
Right.
That make all the difference for the quality of that person's life, however long or short it is. That's what happened between me and these kids in Nicaragua. The kids that I had been with on the streets came to find me to tell me because they had someone who loved them.
And I love that they called you mama.
They'd gotten themselves to school. One of them got to the States. Another one started an orphanage and had a daughter named after me.
Oh my gosh.
They had a role model of human caring, and that human caring was the piece that was the healer all along before I'd ever had medical training. And that's the heart of who we are that goes with us everywhere we go if we don't have it trained out of us.
Yes, and that's a whole nother story that we could spend time on. So let's transition. I'm going to thank you, and we're going to wrap up this session and come back to talk about the specifics, and maybe you can even lead us in a little HeartMath training. But I want to spend another little session on HeartMath itself, what it is, who you help, and what it can do for people in medicine.
Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you, Bev. And thank you to all of you for the work you do. You really are my heroes.